This week's guest on Poetry from Daily Life is Matt Mason, who lives in Omaha, Nebraska. Matt, who was the Nebraska State Poet from 2019 to 2024, started writing in high school, and not long after, learned that through poetry he was better able to understand his own feelings. Today, he says he loves many ways of looking at poetry, but likes narrative poems best. He loved working on the recent book, At the Corner of Fantasy and Maine, Disneyland, Midlife, and Churros, which he says started as a lark, poems about roller coasters and whatnot, but turned into a meaningful project.
I'm a fan of narrative poems, poems that tell a story. As I see it, that's how poetry started, with epic poems that had to be memorized to be passed down, as people didn't have printing presses or maybe even written work yet. That's why those poems have rhyme and or have a steady rhythm, so that the author can pass it down in a way that's easier to memorize word for word. Those poems are still with us today, with Gilgamesh, the Odyssey, the Ramayana, and others. It can seem sometimes now, though, that most poems need to be translated to us by a critic or a teacher, picked apart and explained to us so that we can understand its deeper meaning. It's led to poetry too often seeming like something difficult rather than a thing to be enjoyed. Not that a difficult poem shouldn't be written. I certainly write some, but I love that there are more poets out there in publishing, in poetry slams, in cowboy poetry gatherings, with poems that need no explanation. And then, if you look more deeply into them, you might find some surprises and marvels, as writing an easy poem usually is far from easy. Robert Frost was like that. You can read a Frost poem once and get something wonderful from it. And then, if you read it a few more times, you may see more and more things going on under the surface. But that first reading is one which opens the door, rather than leaving readers mystified. That all said, here's a poem of mine from my book, At the Corner of Fantasy and Maine, Disneyland, Midlife, and Churros. The book is about, yes, Disneyland, which was a fun subject to play with in these poems, as I was, ultimately, telling a larger story about growing older and living life after my parents had passed away. This poem centers on describing one particular part of Disneyland Park, where two lands intersect. At the corner of New Orleans and Frontier. Under Old West guitar and jazz band trumpet, where the riverboat steam horn blares, you order a corn dog. Beignets and étouffées are down the way, cowboy. You don't have to put up with that. But the sun dips into everybody's eyes. Strollers full of screams rock by, and you start searching at the popcorn cart and in your life for something more than everything you've been settling for.